Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to Interesting Knowledge YouTube channel. We're always bringing you the latest and hottest updates. Today, we're diving into how Americans feel about Donald Trump's second term as president. Spoiler alert, the vibes are leaning more negative than positive, especially as he gears up for his first big speech to Congress. Trump's upcoming speech and public opinion poll. Donald Trump is set to give his first speech to Congress in his second term on March 4. Ahead of that, CNN and SSRS ran a poll online and over the phone, with 2,212 adults across the U.S. from February 24 to 28. They checked out three key things about Trump's job performance: how much people support him, whether his priorities are on point, and if his policies are steering America in the right direction. The results? More folks are giving him a thumbs down than a thumbs up. Specifically, 52% aren't happy with what he's done since starting his second term. Among younger people 18 to 34 years old, 51% think he's taking the country off track, with just 31% backing him. Plus, 61% in that group say he's not focusing enough on the big, urgent issues facing the nation. Trump versus Zelensky showdown and immediate fallout. Here's something worth noting. That poll wrapped up before a fiery clash between Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Oval Office on February 28, U.S. time. This public shouting match was a first, and it totally stalled a deal between Washington and Kiev about sharing mineral rights. Right after that, protests supporting Ukraine popped up all over the U.S. People were waving signs saying stuff like "Support Ukraine" and "Shame on the world," while others waved Ukrainian flags to show solidarity. In New York, hundreds gathered at Times Square, proudly carrying Ukraine's blue and yellow flag on their backs. Worries about U.S.-Russia ties and Zelensky's UK trip. Meanwhile, signs that Trump's administration is getting cozy with Putin have set off alarm bells across Europe and among U.S. Democrats, who are worried America's tilting toward Russia on the Ukraine issue. Trump's take? He says Americans should chill out about Putin, or we might end up like Europe. On March 1, after a tense meeting with Trump, Ukraine's president headed to the UK with fresh hopes of sorting out the conflict with Russia. At a press conference there, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer reaffirmed his support for Ukraine during talks with Zelensky, saying, "We've got Ukraine's back, no matter how long it takes." UK's commitment and European summit. Starmer also made it clear that Ukraine's got full support from all over the UK. He stressed Britain's rock-solid determination to secure a fair and lasting peace for Ukraine. Zelensky, in response, thanked Starmer for the UK's heartfelt backing, saying, "We're so glad to have partners and friends like this." That meeting happened just a day before a big summit with European leaders, hosted by Starmer himself, to talk defense and security plans. It also came right after Zelensky's heated exchange with Trump at the White House, which highlighted some growing cracks between Europe and the U.S. Zelensky left Washington without signing any mineral deal with America, despite high hopes going into the trip. Financial support from the UK and G7 for Ukraine. Once that U.S. meeting wrapped up, several European leaders doubled down on their support for Ukraine and Zelensky. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, emphasized the bloc's commitment to stepping up aid for Ukraine in its ongoing clash with Russia. She posted on X, "Today, the free world knows we need new leadership. We Europeans have to step up to this challenge." On the same day, March 1, the UK signed a deal with Ukraine, offering a loan worth £2.26 billion, about $2.84 billion, backed by frozen Russian assets. This is part of a bigger plan by the G7 countries. Ukraine's finance minister, Serhiy Marchenko, said, "The UK keeps standing up for Ukraine. This deal boosts our defense capabilities." The UK Treasury added that the loan will go toward buying defense gear Ukraine needs. Back in October 2024, the G7 agreed to loan Ukraine nearly $50 billion, with the US pitching in the biggest chunk at $20 billion. EU countries like France, Germany, and Italy are chipping in $19.4 billion together, while the rest, about $10 billion, comes from Canada, $3.7 billion, Japan, $3.07 billion, and the UK, $2.84 billion. Frozen Russian assets and Trump-Zelensky relations outlook. Under this G7 plan, Ukraine's already gotten $1 billion from the US and $3.1 billion from the EU. The West has frozen around $300 billion in Russian assets, but they can only tap into the yearly profits, about $3.2 billion, from those funds. That money's being used to back the $50 billion loan for Kyiv. Most of those frozen assets are held in Europe. According to Reuters, Zelensky still believes he can patch things up with Trump after their big White House argument. But he says any talks need to happen behind closed doors. Chatting with reporters at the end of his UK trip, Zelensky pointed out how tricky it is to handle sensitive negotiations in public. He said, "We shouldn't have had talks like the one with Trump out in the open. Our enemies can exploit any disagreements between allies." Still, he's hopeful that spat at the White House will blow over. Zelensky's take on diplomacy and America's role. Zelensky added, "What went down in the Oval Office is best left to history." He's ready to talk to Trump again if invited, to tackle real issues. There's been no contact at his level with the White House since that meeting, but he says a deal for the U.S. to co-develop Ukraine's mineral resources is ready to sign. Zelensky insists the U.S.-Ukraine relationship will keep going strong. He called America a strategic partner and said dropping that bond would only help Russia. "I think our relationship's gonna stick around," he said. "We're grateful to every country that's supported us. Bipartisan backing's always been there for us, and I think it'll stay that way." Who came out on top in the Trump-Zelensky clash? Meanwhile, Finland's President Alexander Stubb called Russia's Vladimir Putin the winner of the public Trump-Zelensky showdown at the White House. In an interview with EL Radio 1, Stubb said, "There's really only one winner here, and he wasn't even in the room." Republican strategist Karl Rove agreed, saying Putin was the only winner in the chaotic 10-minute Oval Office brawl involving Trump, Vice President Vance, and Zelensky. On Fox News right after, Rove said, "This could have happened without cameras rolling, but the only winner today is Vladimir Putin." He argued it's why diplomacy shouldn't play out in public, pointing to how US, Russian, and UK leaders hashed out tough World War II talks privately before delivering a united message. "This was a mistake to air," Rove said. Zelensky messed up by losing his cool, and the president and VP messed up by commenting publicly. This wasn't a moment for TV. U.S. officials weigh in on Ukraine and Zelensky. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said Zelensky got a clear message during his February 28 meeting with Trump: future financial aid depends on Ukraine being open to peace talks. She said this after Zelensky's fiery face-off with Trump and VP J.D. Vance, adding, Zelensky needed to hear it straight from America's funding source. "We're not handing out cash unless you're here for peace." National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan hinted at a possible shift in Washington's stance, suggesting Zelensky might need to step down if he won't pursue diplomacy. "We need a leader who can work with us, then cut a deal with Russia to end this war," Sullivan said. House Speaker Mike Johnson chimed in, saying Zelensky needs to snap out of it and get back to the negotiating table with gratitude, or someone else should take over to chase a U.S.-brokered peace deal. Zelensky fires back at U.S. pressure. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, a top Trump ally and Ukraine supporter, wondered if the U.S. can still work with Zelensky after the White House drama. In a message to Ukrainians, Graham said, "I don't know if Zelensky can get you where you want to go with America. Either he changes big time, or you need someone new." Zelensky hit back, rejecting U.S. calls to quit. In an interview with UK media, he said, Ukraine's president gets elected, not at Lindsey Graham's house, but in Ukraine. Right after his Trump meeting, he'd already made it clear he's not stepping down over the White House tiff. "That calls up to the Ukrainian people," he said. "Americans pick their president, only Ukrainians pick ours." Zelensky and the NATO resignation option. In a recent chat with Sky News during his UK trip, Zelensky was asked if he'd resign if Ukraine joins NATO. He said, "I could trade myself for NATO." The British paper took it as a hint he'd step down as president if Ukraine gets into the military alliance. He added, "I've said I'd swap myself for NATO membership. That'd mean I've done my job. Ukraine in NATO means my mission's complete." But he admitted replacing him wouldn't be simple. "It's not easy," he said. "Elections alone won't cut it. You'd have to stop me from running, which is tougher. So they'd have to negotiate with me." U.S. aid to Ukraine right now. Tensions between Trump and Zelensky have muddied the waters for a massive mineral deal worth billions and ongoing U.S. aid to Ukraine. Since taking office in late January, Trump's administration hasn't rolled out any new aid packages, just kept going with ones approved under Joe Biden. Last week, the State Department pulled the plug on a $25 million USAID program to support Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure, per the Washington Post. That move leaves Ukraine's power grid vulnerable as Russian attacks continue. Trump's team is rethinking America's financial and military commitments to Kyiv. Plan to restart Nord Stream 2. The Financial Times, citing insiders, says U.S. investors are backing a plan to fire up Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany. It could be a key bargaining chip to end the Ukraine conflict. The plan's being orchestrated by Matthias Warnig, ex-CEO of the Nord Stream 2 operator based in Switzerland. Sources say American investors are jumping in, signaling a huge shift in Trump's relationship with Moscow. In his first term, Trump was dead set against Nord Stream 2, slapping sanctions on it. As late as October 2024, he bragged he'd killed the project. But since returning to the White House in January 2025, he's warmed up to Russia, pushing for closer political and economic ties and hinting at lifting some sanctions. Nord Stream 2 details and global reactions. The FT says Warnig's plan has U.S. business folks lobbying the White House in hush-hush diplomatic efforts to bring peace to Ukraine. Some in Trump's circle see Nord Stream 2 as a solid lever for talks. American investors have sketched out a deal to team up with Russia's Gazprom to run Nord Stream 2 once sanctions are gone. An unnamed senior U.S. official figured these investors could rake in cash without lifting a finger. Nord Stream 2 was built to back up the already running Nord Stream 1, finished in 2021 but never turned on due to fears of Europe relying too much on Russian energy. In September 2022, both Nord Stream lines got trashed by underwater explosions leaking gas. One Nord Stream 2 branch is still intact and full of gas, but Germany's nixed using it due to sanctions and political pressure. Russia and the EU on energy. Russia's always claimed it's a dependable energy supplier. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in January that Moscow's ready to restart gas deliveries to the EU if buyers step up. Since the Ukraine war kicked off in 2022, the EU's been cutting its reliance on Russian energy, buying pricier liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the US instead. But plenty of EU countries still quietly buy Russian pipeline gas and LNG. The FT earlier reported EU officials are mulling resuming Russian gas imports as part of a Ukraine peace deal. Supporters say it could lower energy costs and revive European industry. In a recent Economist interview, Friedrich Merz, possibly Germany's next chancellor, said Berlin's not going back to Russian gas right now but didn't rule it out forever. Eastern Europe's defense proposal. For Eastern European nations, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania pitched a $10 billion defense line along their borders with Russia and Belarus to the European Commission (EC). It's part of a push to beef up the EU's eastern border security amid rising threats from those neighbors. The proposal aims to shape the EU's upcoming white paper on defense, setting out big projects member states should fund together and figuring out the cash to make it happen. Per a document Euractiv.com got on March 1, these countries want to build a northeast border shield, a full-on defense system blending Poland's eastern shield with the Baltic states' Baltic defense line. It could expand to cover Finland's 1,340-kilometer border with Russia and southern nations too. Details of the EU defense investment package. In their pitch to the EC, the four countries said, "We need urgent action to boost counterattacks, air surveillance, air defense, electronic warfare countermeasures, and underwater security at our borders." The $10 billion package covers stuff like building tough fortifications, setting up high-tech border monitoring, boosting electronic warfare, adding drones and anti-drone measures, and constructing warehouses for gear, fuel, ammo, and explosives, plus logistics for transport and shelters. Notably, it skips fancy missile defense systems, modern air forces, fighter jets, or naval assets that'd jack up costs. The EC estimates a full air missile defense system for Europe could hit $500 billion. Beyond land defenses, the proposal flags protecting underwater infrastructure, budgeting $2 billion EU-wide for a layered undersea defense dome with monitoring, tracking, and defense capabilities, plus info-sharing channels for threats and incidents. Extra defense investments for the EU. That underwater focus is a response to growing worries about cyber attacks, sabotage, and other threats to Europe's critical undersea infrastructure. Another $10 billion is proposed to improve military mobility, moving troops and gear across the continent fast, a key piece of the EU's overall defense strategy for quick deployment to hotspots. The four nations also want $50 billion EU-wide, on top of national spending, for stockpiling ammo and missiles. This would help companies stock up on essentials like propellants, explosives, and artillery shells. The plan includes expanding EU joint procurement (EDIRPA) and production (ASAP) programs for critical battlefield ammo, like 155mm shells, especially anti-tank and air defense rounds. Context and future of EU defense. This proposal comes as Europe's security gets shakier, especially along the EU's eastern edge. Frontline countries say guarding the Russia-Belarus border is crucial to protecting the whole EU. Since the Russia-Ukraine war started over 3 years ago, strengthening borders has been a top priority for neighbors. The pitch calls for the EU to cough up $100 billion by 2028 to boost continental defense, alongside national investments. EC President Ursula von der Leyen has repeatedly backed these projects lately, suggesting the proposals got a good shot at serious consideration as the EU drafts its defense white paper.